Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I work in Washington at the U.S. Chamber, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the last one on the panel today. So I guess that's the final barrier between you and lunch. My direction today is to focus on the national impact of the unconventional revolution. And you've certainly heard parts of it throughout the presentations, especially after the break. I'll try to put it all together for you, and then also give you a little bit of the half-empty side, which is to say that this isn't a heavenly divined guarantee, that there are ways that we could screw it up. One of the things I do a lot is travel around the country and speak to local chambers of commerce and the like. Right now, one of the most important things I think we can do at the federal level, and more importantly at the community level, is help people appreciate that everything they've been taught about energy is basically old. It's wrong. All of us, whether we're 5 or 95, have been indoctrinated that to the point, or along the lines that the United States is a very energy poor country. We're gluttons. We consume more than everyone else, and we don't have a whole lot, and therefore our policies reflect that. That may or may not have been true 40 years ago when most of those policies were put in place on the heels of the Arab oil embargo. But the fact of the matter is it's not true anymore. And I'm going to start off with this because I think if you remember nothing else, remember this. We are not energy poor, we are energy rich. If you look at the resources we have throughout the country, technically recoverable resources, which means geologists have gone out and identified whether it's oil, gas, or coal, and the engineers have a process to get it out of the ground. The only question is, does it make economic sense? We have over 100 years of natural gas, 200 years of oil, and almost 500 years of coal. And then if you take it one step further to in-place resources, which are the geologists have found it. They know it's there, but the engineering hasn't quite caught up to pull it out of the ground yet at basically any cost. We have almost 600 years of gas, over 500 years of coal, and over 500 years of oil, and almost 10,000 years of coal. We have more fossil fuels than any country in the world. Yet our policies are still focused on conservation of we need to conserve our resources because we don't have enough. I'm not saying that you spend like a drunken sailor, but our policies haven't caught up yet. Okay, looking at 2020, what does this all mean from a national perspective? Well, I mean, if you look at what the U.S. government is projecting, we're going to produce a lot and we're going to import much less. This is oil. You look going from 2012 through 2020, you have exponential growth until about 2016, surpassing the U.S. all-time high, which we had about in 1971. The expansion in production just over the last 5 years from 2008, we increased our production by about 50% in oil. By volume, that was the largest single increase in the history of the world. And it's also just that increase from 2008 to 2005, that amount alone would be about the 6th largest oil producing country in the world. This is a massive amount. It's been cataclysmic across many landscapes, much of which was already discussed, especially on the international side. But you see, once we get to about 2016, the U.S. government sees it kind of plateauing. I think it's probably going to plateau a lot sooner. We're being victims of our own success, much like we have with methane on the dry gas side, producing more than the country can consume. Right now, consumption of petroleum products in this country, or petroleum in general, is flat. Part of that has to do with the tail end of the recession, and part of it has to do with, we're sort of moving into that kind of European model of a country. We've been around long enough that we're not really expanding from a population base. We're getting much more efficient as far as how we use our energy, but the bottom line is we're not consuming as much. And we have this artificial barrier surrounding us saying that we can't export it anywhere outside of Canada. So if we're not going to buy more ourselves and we can't send it to other places, it naturally has to stop. It's an artificial ceiling. And the same is true with natural gas also. We hit a glut about 2 years ago, meaning that supplying more is coming out of the ground than the country is consuming. The good side for natural gas, which I'll get to, is that there's plenty of room for growth. But the bottom line is we also have serious issues trying to export that as well. These are artificial constraints that have been put in place by the federal government based off of a dated concept that we don't have enough energy. Look at the gas side. NGL production through the roof. It's already more than doubled in the last 4 years. You look at dry gas production, gradual growth over the next couple of years, and then it shoots up again. Here's why. This is how natural gas breaks down consumption across our economy. You see that industrial consumption is the leading sector where dry gas goes. But for the time frame there, right around 2009, 2010, where electricity overtook it, and that's largely because anytime the economy tanks, industrial production is going to constrict, and so demand went down there too. But you'll see both on both the electrical side and the industrial side, for many of the reasons we've heard already in previous presentations, they're inching up, which is good, because even in spite of the fact that right now we're sort of at a peak demand, if you will, based on, or an equilibrium where our economy would have it, our economy is evolving. We're going to use more natural gas. We're going to use more natural gas because there are ways to use it within the industrial sector. We're going to use more natural gas because there are opportunities in the electrical sector, partially because of government regulations pushing coal out, and partially because it is cheaper now than it has been historically. We, at the U.S. Chamber, we partnered with the American Chemistry Council and a few of our other friends in Washington, D.C., and hired sort of the most reputable firm around to do what was and still is the only macroeconomic look at what the shale revolution has done for this country and what it's going to do. And they looked at several stages. They looked just at the extraction initially, all the economic activity that's happening like it is right here, supply chains that stretch across the country. I mean, Ohio was benefiting before the first well was even, the permit was even applied for in this country. Because the manufacturing base here, there were folks that I've worked with who were supporting what was happening in North Dakota and South Texas. Long supply chain, very labor intense. Then we also looked at the midstream. As has been discussed over the last few years, we've seen a massive build out of the midstream, the gathering lines, the pipelines, the fractionation facilities, and now even rail, a lot more than I think people even anticipated 6 months ago. All this on the order of about $50 or $60 billion over the last 3 years. I would consider that sort of the second domino, if you will, in this revolution. The third domino is the petrochemical and chemical and refining side of things. Once those companies have a sort of guarantee supply, meaning the pipes have been built right up to the door of where they want to build or where they want to expand, then the many facilities that have been announced, they will make a final decision whether or not to build it. Our study found that between now and 2020, it's probably going to be on the order of about $130 billion invested in this space. And then the final domino to fall is once those facilities get built and they start spitting out the resins and the chemicals, the polymers that they produce, then the traditional manufacturers that most Americans think of, and certainly states like Ohio is famous for, then they can take advantage of that, because now all of a sudden their feedstock is coming out of these facilities at an economically competitive rate, and also at a much greater supply. And so you have 4 dominoes falling, which ultimately leads to a manufacturing renaissance. One point that I don't think has been made yet, or at least I didn't hear it, the primary reason driving this is because of not only the supply of our natural gas, but the price, which has been covered, but it's the comparison with the rest of the world. I mean, at the end of the day, a hydrocarbon is a hydrocarbon, whether it's in the form of coal, gas, or oil. It's just the molecules are sort of bound together differently. But at the end of the day, the petrochemical sector pulls those apart and uses the molecules inside that hydrocarbon. The rest of the world, save for the Middle East, and that's a different story, but in Europe and Asia, they still derive their molecules, if you will, for these industries from naphtha, which is a byproduct of refining oil, meaning their feedstock is oil. Our feedstock here is natural gas. It's ethane, it's butane, it's propane. And because of this shale revolution and bringing the price down to a reasonable level, some of the cheapest in the world, save for places like Qatar, where they basically, poke a hole in the ground and the gas pops up. This is the cheapest gas in the world. And that is giving people doing business here a tremendous competitive advantage, because doing business elsewhere means they have to buy it off of oil. on a per BTU basis, it's significantly cheaper to use the Henry Hub price of gas here, or whatever the input price is based on, than it is to use the global oil price that the rest of the world has to compete with. Not only that, but the gap in labor, the labor costs is narrowing. As China becomes more industrialized, they have to pay their people more money. And so their advantage that they've had as far as being able to pay their workforce much cheaper than they have here, that's going away. You add all of this up, it's making the US the place for everyone to be who wants to be competitive. You operate in Europe, you're going to lose your shorts, because for natural gas there, roughly at $12 a million BTU. So yes, they're using oil just like they are in Asia. Ultimately, what we found is if you look across all of these dominoes, you see almost 4 million jobs being created between now and 2025, over 3 million between now and 2020. And that breaks it down. It shows you that obviously the upstream side, the poking the holes in the ground, which is happening all throughout this region, it's much more labor intensive and a lot more jobs are being created there. Now, the engineers on the chemical and refining side, they are the best in the world, and they've been able to automate the processes much more so than the upstream side. Thus, it doesn't take as many people. But still, in 2012, over 50,000 jobs just in that area, and these are jobs that are related, I guess I should have said this from the beginning, my apologies. These are jobs created solely because of shale development. So they looked at the entire industry and then pulled out, separated, but for this new input of oil and gas coming from shale development, this wouldn't be here. So just from shale development alone, 50,000 jobs in the downstream side, going up to over 300,000 jobs. Now, obviously, as has been stated, the vast majority of those jobs and that investment is going to happen in the Gulf Coast. It just happens to have all of the incumbent infrastructure that's necessary, and it also happens to be right next to a gigantic ocean. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen here. Obviously it is. Places like Northeast Ohio, places like Western Pennsylvania, places like the Panhandle of West Virginia, we're already starting to see that happen. But, I think we all appreciate that it's going to be very difficult to go one for one with Louisiana, Texas together. Also, you look at what it's generating as far as government revenue. Right now in Washington, D.C., we can't even figure out if we're going to pay our bills. Are we going to pay our bills? Are we going to close the government? And all of it comes back to, what is our fiscal policy? Where are we getting money from? How much money should we spend? At the end of the day, this shale revolution is creating a tremendous amount of money is going to the federal and state government. And this is money that was not planned on 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. You look in 2012, all told, it was over $74 billion. And then you go up through 2020, $125 billion. You add it all up, all the way across from 2012 to 2025, $1.6 trillion. Now that's real money even in Washington, D.C. And that's not money that anyone in Congress was anticipating. Frankly, it's not money that almost anyone in Congress even knows is now coming into the government. I mean, you and I might go and wash our jeans on a Sunday afternoon and find a $5 bill in our pocket and think, man, this is my lucky day. Well, the federal government is finding a $1.6 trillion bill in its pocket and doesn't even understand that it's happening. But they will soon. The average American, this is another thing we found in our study. If you go back to like 2005 and you look at the projections as far as what goods were going to cost, what energy was going to cost, it was going to be exponentially higher than it is now. We were assuming we were going to have to import natural gas from all over the world because we didn't have enough. Obviously, that's been turned on its head. And what we found is if you compare where we were going with where we are, the difference is about $1,200 per average American family. And that's going to keep growing up to about $2,200 in 2020. We're getting more efficient. This is part of the innovation. You already see that fewer wells yielding more product. This is going to keep going. This is going to keep progressing, I should say. This is the most innovative sector of the economy. And one final point is, like I said to begin with, this isn't all guaranteed. One of the things that we did with our study was to ask them to overlay what would happen if the federal government got involved and started regulating here and regulating there. What would happen if states started tinkering around, raising severance taxes that aren't necessarily the most lucrative for industry to invest in any one particular state. And what they found was laying all these sets of regulations and basically additional operating costs was there would be 1.4 million jobs less created by 2015 than what they assume is going to happen naturally. This is not guaranteed. We can still screw it up, and I'm not convinced that we won't. And here's one of the reasons why. Right now you have 406 bans on hydraulic fracturing throughout the country. Now only about 4 of them are legitimate in the sense that they're actually impacting operations, but this is happening almost every month. It's happening, unfortunately, even in places like Ohio. And we have a ballot measure in Colorado now that is suggesting to ban it statewide. And industry is very, very fearful that it may get success. Now, one thing I want to mention here, this is something that you don't really think about. Obviously, Ohio is a coal state. It's a coal-producing state, coal consumption state. But we're in the midst of a pretty significant restructuring in our electricity sector. And this is going to impact the natural gas side of things from the wellhead all the way through the value chain. What we're showing right now is because of EPA rules, we're already expecting about 10% of all of our power generating fleet to shut down by about 2015. That's coal plants. 20% of all the coal plants equals about 10% of all of our plants. Almost all of that is up here. This is where these shutdowns are happening. And this is before the EPA even gets to regulating carbon dioxide, which it's in the process of doing right now. I tell you this because once they go after coal, gas is next. And that's not rhetorical, like if they can go after coal, they can go after gas. Gas has carbon dioxide in it. Not as much as coal, but it still has carbon dioxide. The way the Clean Air Act works is they keep lowering the thresholds. Right now, you can build a brand new combined cycle natural gas plant, and it clears the hurdle. In 8 years, by definition, it won't. And that means the demand for natural gas is going to take a hit. What it means ultimately is at some point, probably in my lifetime, we've committed ourselves to no longer using coal or natural gas in our generation sector. Now, that's not plausible, but that's the path that we're on. But for either one, technology evolving to a point to get around that, or two, Congress changing the law, neither one of which seems very likely right now, that's the path that we're on. This is going to hurt at the wellhead because this is going to decrease the demand. Momentarily, it'll be somewhat decent because as coal gets pushed out, as I showed you, demand for natural gas goes up. But then once it starts pinching natural gas, it goes down there. So we can screw this up. I hope we don't, but it takes everyone's voice to explain to the people that we send to Columbus, to the people that we send to Washington, D.C., that this isn't guaranteed, and hey, we need this stuff. This is smart. This is the right thing to do. Thank you very much.